Sometimes composers act like magicians, taking a simple little tune and transforming it into a bunch of different pieces that are all completely different and all beautiful. How does someone like Johannes Brahms take a tune like this and transform it into something like this? Or this? Or even this? Hi, I'm John from Chorale Harmony, and today we're going to take a look into the genius of Johannes Brahms, specifically focusing on his masterwork for piano, the Variations and Fugue on a Theme by Handel. Johannes Brahms was born in 1833 in Hamburg, Germany. During his life, he attained a high degree of fame as a pianist and composer, and has been widely regarded as the successor of Beethoven. During his career, he liked to incorporate the forms and techniques of earlier composers into his own music, in spite of the fact that his own music is rather innovative for the time. Two of those forms were the variation and the fugue, both of which Brahms was to employ in the piece that we're about to look at, his Variations and Fugue on a Theme by Handel. Brahms spent a considerable amount of time and energy studying the music of the Baroque period, and one of the composers that he loved to study was George Frederick Handel. In September of 1861, Brahms took an aria written by Handel for the harpsichord and wrote a set of 25 variations and a magnificent fugue based on this aria, and dedicated it to his friend Clara Schumann. Now, I think it ought to be said here that variations up to this point, and especially variations from the Baroque, were typically variations on a set of chords and a bass line, and not really variations on the melody. For example, Bach's Goldberg variations from the Baroque period are all variations on the harmony and bass line from the original aria at the beginning of the piece. But Brahms decided to take a slightly different approach. He decided that he wanted to make the variations on the melody of the piece at the beginning of the Variations and Fugue. But how would Brahms accomplish that? Well, actually, it's pretty simple. All he really needed to do was to strip away all the non-essential ornamental notes and keep the essential ones as a sort of melodic skeleton. And then in the variations, he can just add new ornaments to the already existing skeleton and shift the skeleton notes around as he pleases, the essential notes. And in order to understand this better, let's take a look at three of Brahms's variations: Variation 1, Variation 4, and Variation 5. But first, let's take a look at the theme. Let's first play through the theme at the beginning of the piece. It's in two parts, an A section and a B section. Both are repeated, but I'm dropping all the repeats for the examples here. This is what the theme sounds like. As you can see, this theme has a range that is limited to an octave, there are no chromatic notes, and it is mostly stepwise. The simplicity of the tune lends itself very well to being used for variations, because Brahms can add chromaticism, explore octaves outside the original range of the theme, and add leaps and runs where he wants to. The Handel theme is, to quote his own words, a neutral starting point. If we look a bit closer at the theme, we may begin to notice that many of the notes simply decorate other notes that seem to form the overall arc of the melody. If we remove these non-essential notes, we get a skeletal melody of sorts. Let's see what this might be like. See how you can still recognize the original melody in this form, even if it is quite different? This shows us one of the basic principles behind melody writing. A melody will usually consist of at least a basic arc of notes, and composers often choose to ornament this arc with things like turns, trills, leaps between notes, arpeggio figures, runs, etc. The possibilities are endless. For the rest of the piece, this is exactly what Brahms is going to do, with various degrees of faithfulness to the original melody. We're just going to look at 3 examples for our purposes here, variations 1, 2, and 5. Here is variation 1. To make things plainer, let's isolate the melody and identify the essential notes, which are all marked in red. In this variation, Brahms mainly decorates the melody with 16th note lower neighbors, adds runs before the start of parts A and B, and keeps the essential notes on the strong part of the beat, most of the time. The tune is thus still recognizable, but already sounds quite different from the original setting. What about variation 2? Yikes, a bunch of chromaticism all of a sudden. How did we end up here? Let's take a look at the isolated melody line again. As you can see, in spite of how crazy this variation sounds at first, it is still basically the same melody, perhaps with 1 or 2 dropped notes. This time the melody is in triplets, with both lower neighbor figures and chromatic passing tone figures, among other things. The essential tones are sometimes in the strong part of the beat, and sometimes not. All these changes, plus the juxtaposition of triple over duple meter in this variation, make it a unique and astonishing development of the theme. Variations 1 through 4 remain more or less in the original key of B-flat major, but Brahms decides to shift to the parallel minor in the 5th variation here. When we look at the isolated melody line, we see a somewhat freer treatment of the essential notes. Brahms does not feel compelled to keep these notes on the beats they occupied in the original theme, but you can still hear them. Overall, it's a lovely little piece, and if you're listening to the variations up to this point, you might forget that this is a variation because it just hides the essential notes so well in a completely new context. And so that was a very brief look into how Brahms made use of the variation form and put his own spin on it. I would strongly encourage you to look up this piece yourself and listen to it and study it. It's well worth listening to the entire piece from beginning to end. It really is a masterpiece in so many ways. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.